Hey everyone, and welcome to the most dynamic learning series this May, your front row ticket to beating Lyme disease. I'm your guide on this journey where knowledge meets action. This month is all about empowerment, and you are in the perfect spot. This week, we're diving into tick bite tactics, mastering prevention, tick bite management, prophylactic treatments. So whether it's mastering tick bite prevention, acute symptom recognition, or conquering chronic challenges, we're going to be tackling it head on. You're not just watching a class, you're stepping into a community that's ready to rise above Lyme disease. And hey, if you love diving into these life-changing topics, smash that subscribe button and turn on those bell notifications, and let's make Lyme disease awareness echo across the globe. So grab your notes, ignite your enthusiasm, and let's roll. Are you ready? Let's dive right in. Hey, and welcome everyone. Dr. Tom here, and so happy to have you with me on this first Wednesday of May 2024 for our Lyme Awareness Month 5-part mini-series. So welcome. So happy to have you here. As we get started, love to have you just drop a quick note in the chat where you're zooming in from so that we all know where we're from. And certainly it's always nice to know where our community is and where we're spreading this word to. So feel free to say hello to everybody and drop a little note in the chat there. And yeah, very excited to get going tonight. Usually what I do is try to start right at the top of the hour, but make sure that we give everybody a few minutes, understanding that things are going on. So I'll just chit chat for a moment before we get cracking, but this should be a lot of fun. As I mentioned, this is going to be part one. This is going to be part one of the 5-part series that we're going to do throughout May. A lot of really great things going to be going on. I will highlight exactly what we're going to walk through once we start the official presentation. But again, thanks for being here and moving stuff here. Oh, yay, chat's disabled. All right. Well, thank you for chatting into the Q&A there. I don't know. Every once in a while, these things get turned off. Chat attendees can chat with. Let's see if this works. There's a setting. It looks like we're on everyone right now. There we go. Utah. All right. Got Dan from Utah. There we go. A couple of friends of mine I see in the chat and in the participant list. Thank you guys all for being here. And thanks to Tom for letting me know about the chat being disabled because we got that. Definitely got that taken care of now. I appreciate that. We've got Ontario, Canada, Jersey. All right, I'm from Jersey. I see Vermont, which is great because I went to the University of Vermont from New Jersey. That was amazing. And I saw somewhere in there, Connecticut, which is, I spent tons and tons of time there. Now I'm currently sitting in Utah, but we're all over the place. Austin, Texas, lots of friends over there. Long Island, I've got a bunch of people from there, some Kentuckians. I don't know, is it Kentuckians? I don't know. I might be doing that one wrong, but that's great. Got Georgia and New York and Michigan. All right. Great to see everybody here. Thanks so very much for being here. Nice to meet all of you that I haven't met before. All right. From Jersey too. Yeah, I grew up in the Hamilton, Mercerville area, right outside of Trenton. And then, it was all over the place. I like that, calling in from New England. It was kind of like New Jersey to Vermont, back to Jersey to New York, where I got Lyme disease. I was actually working at the Institute of Ecosystem Studies, trying to teach kids about my passion for the outdoors, saving the planet, and getting people really motivated for it. And I ended up getting Lyme and babesiosis. And so took a long time to get better. It took 8 years to get an actual diagnosis, and then 13 years overall between when I first got sick and when I got all the way better. Good news is, at the time we're talking, I've been over 12 years without a symptom of Lyme or babesiosis. So I know that you can get better. I also know that that was a really long 13-year road that took up a large part of my life. But after that, I actually went to Maine for medical school, then Connecticut for a long time, and then hanging out here in Park City, Utah area. Yeah, unfortunately, that was where I was contracted, Lyme disease is Monmouth County, New Jersey, right? So yeah, a lot of us have been outside enjoying ourselves. And that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight as we dive in is really like, what, where's Lyme coming from? What are the things we need to look out for? How can we actually prevent getting Lyme? And so just a quick announcement before we start. The replay is, we're going to have a replay of both this session tonight as well as all the subsequent sessions every Wednesday in May. That will get posted within the first 48 hours after we're done onto YouTube. And I'll give you a link for all of that. In fact, I'm going to drop this into the chat. We have, if you don't mind, taking a moment and just click on the link that I just dropped there. It just goes to our YouTube page. If you could subscribe there, that'd be amazing, because a couple things will happen. One is that gives us a lot of support to continue giving you and everyone else this free education and getting together with things like this. This is completely free to anyone who wants to listen and wants to learn. And hopefully we can, at least tonight, really work on helping prevent people from getting Lyme disease. And then when we go further in, we're going to learn about early recognition, early diagnosis and treatment, followed by what do we do in the chronic state. And then we're going to wrap up our month going, oh my gosh, like what do we do when we're actually feeling like crap because we or one of our loved ones have been sick for a long period of time. So we're going to go over the gamut. And the other thing is when you go over and subscribe and then hit those bell notifications, you'll get a notification as soon as we upload the replay. And then also we're doing a whole bunch of other really great stuff. If you want to check out our podcast over there, we have both the video version and the audio versions. And in the last couple that we just relaunched, we have Dr. Chukri Ben Mamoon, who did all that amazing research on tefenaquine and atovaquone, eradicating Babesia, Mycroti, and Duncani. I also had a great conversation with Dr. Ed Breitschwart. We've got some really great ones coming up, including Dr. Ebony Cornish from the Amen Clinics, and all kinds of other things. So we're going to have a really, really great time over on YouTube. So just if you don't mind supporting us, that'd be great. More and more free training and free uplifting educational pieces coming out soon. So thanks so very much for that. Really appreciate it. And then one other thing too, for everybody who sticks around to the end of the video tonight, I'm going to give everybody a free gift that you can download, help you actually get some access to some of the information that we're going to be talking about tonight. So I'll tell you more about that a little bit later. So why don't we just jump on in here? I'm going to do a quick screen share here, and then we'll get cracking. So really what we're going to do over the next little while is we're going to be spending time, like I said, over the next 5 weeks, talking about Lyme awareness. I really want to talk about the basics. And then go all the way through the more recent breakthroughs we've had with research, both from a conventional medical, pharmaceutical perspective, as well as herbal research and stuff. And then I really want to give you the tools to really take back control over your life. One thing I do always have to remind you that this is just for informational purposes. It's really not a substitute for sitting down with a trained physician or other licensed healthcare practitioner to really help you make sure that you're getting the right diagnosis and treatment. But it's out there so that you can watch this and you can learn and be informed. You can get access to some of the papers we're talking about, where the information is coming from. And then the other part is you can share this with your practitioners too, so that they can help. And another reminder, unless you're currently a patient of ours, this doesn't make you a patient of ours yet. But if you happen to need help, we're always, feel free to reach out to the office. With all the legal mumbo jumbo out of the way, let's really dive in here. And really excited. I really tried to break down the next 5 weeks into a clear roadmap from the basics of prevention. So this week, we're going to talk about tick bite tactics. We're going to master prevention. What are we going to do if we get a bite from a tick? In terms of how do we remove it, right? What do we need to be considering? How quick is transmission? And then we're going to talk about prophylactic treatment options, both medication and herbal, and some other options. Then next week, we're going to be talking about beyond the bite, right? So this is going to be, what if we got bit, or maybe we didn't, and we're just outside now, all of a sudden we have these acute symptoms. The most important thing in Lyme disease for me is prevention, closely followed by, if you happen to get Lyme, we want to have early recognition of symptoms, early diagnosis, and early treatment so that we can massively improve our ability to minimize chronic Lyme disease. And what we're going to see between these weeks, we're going to look at different evidence that's out there that sort of supports where we're seeing that a lot of people who do get acute Lyme disease and some form of treatment will be cured. But there is a group, about 20% of them, who can go on the chronic Lyme. But we're going to say that this isn't just like two sides fighting, where there's actually evidence that shows that they're both probably have some part of the truth, which is great because the sides, believe it or not, are actually coming together, which is only a benefit for you and all the other patients out there, right? So then in week 3, we're really going to dive into the chronic challenge. What happens beyond acute Lyme disease? We're going to navigate through chronic Lyme disease. We're going to look at the other tick-borne co-infections, and we're really going to start to dive into what effective treatments are. And then in week 4, we're going to look more at the cutting edge treatments. We're going to take that emerging research and we're going to integrate that into some of these advanced treatment protocols. We're going to get an understanding of where people are coming from. Why are they actually creating these new protocols? And is it just coming out of their head, or is there a basis in science? And, you know, spoiler alert, it's definitely, a lot of these are based in science. And I really want to share that with you so that you're armed with that and you can share that with your practitioners as well. And then on week 5, probably my favorite episode of the whole month is going to be Breaking Free. This is where we learn to overcome flight, and freeze states while healing from Lyme and all these other chronic infections, while healing from chronic toxin overload, mold exposure, mast cell activation syndrome, and all kinds of trauma. And we're going to do a live healing session. I'm going to teach you some really simple approaches, and then we're going to do an experience together that you'll have the replay and be able to go over again and again. But this is also, believe it or not, like everything else I do, anybody who follows me knows, I love it all to be science-based when we can, and then we integrate the art. And the beauty of mixing the art and the science of medicine is there's actually a ton of science behind what we're talking about. So let's dive in and start learning all about that. One of the things I think is really important, and I love showing this all the time. I found this map a long time ago. And, you know, the map to healing is really one of those things that it's not always a straight line, right? But we know that if we follow the principles, we can get to that point where people are able to heal and are able to get to the end point. So for me, I mean, anybody who's heard my long, detailed story, and maybe I'll do a video on that soon on YouTube. But, you know, it was long and circuitous, and I got diagnosed with everything from bipolar and regular depression and ADHD, and then finally fibromyalgia, right? And the problem was, none of the treatments worked. If anything, they only made me worse. And then they finally just told me that I had symptoms, brain fog, fatigue, and joint pain and muscle pain. I'm like, thanks, right? No hope there. So one of the things that really came out of that for me is that, you know, there's a Steve Jobs quote that you can't connect the dots looking into the future. You can only connect them looking backwards. And so I don't know what your path is going to take, but I know when I look back in my journey, it was torturous, you know, it was all over the place. But when I started to learn what was going on and follow science, I could slowly unravel things. And the reality was I had been sick for 8 years before my diagnosis. So no kidding, it took me 4 years to get better. But that's one of those things that's so important. Give it time, let this stuff work. The other thing is there's a question in the comments, can we invite someone else for the next 4 weeks? Absolutely. I will, in a little bit, try to grab the link for that and drop it in the chat. I don't have that on my little cheat sheet on the side here just yet, but we'll get that to you. And certainly the link that you had in the website or in the email that invited you to this, you can use as well. And then the other part of all of this is that all 5 of these will get put up on YouTube. So that's another place for everybody to go find it. So really what I wanted to start off with was the basics. This is so important to me. I think I always tell a lot of the practitioners who work with us, I'm like, walk before you run, or I should say, crawl before you walk before you run, and we'll get there, right? We're always going to be able to get you to that place where you're going to be able to go beyond, but we need to know that foundation. And, you know, it's that whole ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure as well. So what we're going to talk about, what is Lyme? Where does it come from? How do you get it? And who's most at risk? right? So Lyme disease is the most common vector-borne illness in the United States. And really, Lyme is what is what we call Lyme disease is really that constellation of symptoms that is caused by infection by Borrelia burgdorferi. Now, Borrelia burgdorferi is a spirochete, and that's what we typically think of as Lyme disease. It was what was found in the 70s to be causing the outbreak in Lyme, Connecticut area of what looked like juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. But subsequently, we've found that actually there are some other infections that can make things that look like Lyme. So we have Borrelia burgdorferi sensu stricto, which is just what it sounds like, very strict definition. It's Borrelia burgdorferi. But the sensu lato complex is, some of those Greenii, Azellii, Borrelia, Mayoni, Californiensis, and all these emerging Borrelias that can cause some problems. So when we say Lyme disease, we're typically talking about any of them that cause symptoms that look like this thing called Lyme. But before we kind of dive into what Lyme is and where we're getting it and all that other stuff, one of the things we have to know is what are how are we getting it? And we're actually getting it through the bite primarily of an infected tick. So I think it's really important to understand that Lone Star ticks, the one we're seeing right now, may give you Ehrlichia, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Q fever, or even Stareye borreliosis, but they're not transmitting Lyme disease, right? So, and these are really big ticks, so it's really hard to miss these. It's possible to miss a bite, but it's kind of hard. Now, dog ticks, we see a lot of these in the Northeast and over a large part of the country. Again, not transmitting Lyme disease, more likely to cause Rocky Mountain spotted fever and potentially tularemia. And this is important to understand. Again, a lot of people are exposed to these. And could it cause problems? Yes, but just not Lyme disease. On the other hand, though, Ixodes scapularis, the black-legged or the deer tick, as well as Ixodes pacificus, which is the western black-legged tick, can carry things like Lyme disease, different species of babesiosis, anaplasmosis, Borrelia miyamotoi, which is a tick-borne relapsing fever type of Borrelia, as well as Powassan virus. And then there's some discussion of other co-infections, which we'll touch on. And the thing to really know about these is there are two ticks of the Ixodes ticks that we're going to want to worry about. The adult female, and if we go back here, we can get a much better view because she often has this orange backside to her, and then this nymph, right? So this is a picture of them side by side, mom, little baby, on a fingernail. So what you need to know is about 5% of people get Lyme from this one, and about 95% of people get it from a nymph. So for perspective, so 95% of people may be getting Lyme from a nymph tick. This is a poppy seed. The nymph tick is about the size of a poppy seed. So if this is a poppy seed bagel picture with a tick on it, so just take a moment here and just take a peek. Can you see where that tick is? Because this is already greatly magnified over the size of a poppy seed. Let's zoom in a little bit more, and I think it's coming into zoom for us. We've got it right there. But think about that. If you had a bagel, and it looks like we've got a little garlic and we've got our poppy seeds, that tick that can give that 95% of the time on average is giving people Lyme is the size of that poppy seed. So these are no-see-ums. They really can be pretty complicated to find. So I think this is some really important information. And I appreciate the other comment a moment ago about can other people join. So I was able to pull up our registration link, and please feel free to share that. Greatly appreciate it, because we do want to make sure that anybody else knows that that tick can be that size, right? Then the other thing we have to think about is when are ticks active and what's going on in their life cycle, right? So in the spring, the eggs hatch, we have larvae. They're not known to transmit Lyme disease from the larva when they molt into the nymph, but Borrelia miyamotoi actually can come from a larval stage and go to the nymph. So this actually can come from the eggs, right? So it's transovarially transmitted Borrelia miyamotoi about 33% of the time. And Willy Burgdorfer, who was the one who Borrelia burgdorferi is named after, who isolated that spirochete that caused the infection, found that about 3% of Lyme may go from mom kind of transplacentally, if you will, through the egg to the larva, but very uncommon. But the larvae are going to feed, and then they're going to in fall and winter, they're going to kind of rest. And then they're going to molt and they're going to be a nymph. And at this point, the nymph is going to feed on primarily rodents, and then they can be infectious. And so the greatest human risk is going to be spring and the summer and then into the fall, especially when the adults are more active. So the larval peaks are really in August, at least, in most areas. And then the nymphs are in the summer, and the adults are more in this spring and this fall time. With that said, Lyme disease has been reported in all 12 months of the year, because a lot of times you get bitten, you don't have symptoms for weeks or months. And then the other question is, like, really, who gets infected, right? Who are the at-risk groups? Well, we highlighted them here, 5 to 15 and 40 to 60. So it's like kids and their parents, right? And so this is really important to know. If you look at the blue versus the yellow, for some reason, the male sex is certainly turning out maybe to not be the smartest here, and they're at higher risk for Lyme across the board until you get much, much older here. But the risk is still quite high, both men and women. So just remember, ages 5 to 15, 40 to 60 are at the highest risk. But, I could have really pulled this to 30 to 40. I mean, there's a lot of risk even in this zone. So just remember that. And boys slightly more than girls. And so one of the things I think is so important when we look at not only when is Lyme active, and that you can get it it's reported at least every month of the year. And depending upon where you are, you can actually see ticks and be bitten any month of the year, depending upon the weather pattern. We know that sort of these teenagers are at high risk, and then people in the 40s to 60s. But let's look at kids, right? Because they're they are a barometer for what's going on. They're a high-risk group, and about 25% of all people who get Lyme are children. And there's a study published in March of 2023 originally, and then this NIH write-up news release was in April, and it showed that most children, in quotes, recover from Lyme disease within 6 months of treatment. Well, let's look a little deeper. So they took 102 kids, ages 5 to 18, and they did a survey for between 6 months and 10 years before enrollment. They had completed treatment, right? And their treatment was anywhere from 10 to 21 days of a typical antibiotic protocol. And what they said was 75% were cured within 6 months of that treatment, which to me sounds a little scary, but let's dive in a little bit. About a third of people or children, I should say, were better within that first month. Then over the next couple of months, month 2 and 3, we still had another third that were getting better. And it wasn't until we got to the last 14% of that 75% were better in that last, in month 4, 5, 6. So that's kind of crazy, right? You stopped antibiotics, say, after 2 weeks or even 3 weeks. Now you're 5 months later and you still have lingering symptoms that are just getting better. So as that patient, that could be concerning. But more concerning to me is, what about everybody else, right? Because the 25% that aren't accounted for there. Well, they said that at least 22% had one symptom or more that lasted more than 6 months. Ultimately, 9% were diagnosed with post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, which you need to be sick after effective Lyme treatment for more than 6 months to have this. So we know that they were at least 7 months out. Then we have 6% were not fully recovered at the time of the survey, which was 6 months to 10 years after infection. And then 1% had symptoms that were persistent and chronic that were significant enough to impair their daily functioning. So let's see what that means in the grand scheme. So how many people get Lyme disease in a year? This has been changing over the years, but the most recent numbers are about 475,000 people every single year in the United States alone are diagnosed and treated for Lyme disease, right? So if 25% of the people who get Lyme on average are children, and we have this study on these children, let's just say, for discussion's sake, let's extrapolate, right? And if 22% have a symptom that lasts more than 6 months, that's about 105,000 people who still have symptoms after effective, in quotes, Lyme treatment. That means that 9% have post-treatment Lyme, which is roughly 43,000 Americans every year who are going to be getting this post-treatment Lyme. Now, 6% that aren't fully recovered, that's almost 29,000 people. Okay. And then if we have the number, almost 5,000 people have significant impairment in their ability to just do things like go pee, get up, change, take a shower, cook themselves a meal, maybe wash their laundry. So this is significant. I mean, this is a large number. Now, granted, we can't exactly say that these percentages in children are going to transfer over to adults as well. However, when you read the literature, the CDC says about 80% of people who get these, whatever course of antibiotic, are going to be better. And then the other 20%, it's like crickets. No, they're not talking about it. So the question is, what's really going on? And so that kind of lines up. I mean, this is 25-75, that's 80-20. There's research out of Johns Hopkins that we'll talk about in a couple of weeks, where they're seeing that there might be this possibility of essentially early chronic Lyme disease by having persisters inoculate you from the time you get bit by the tick, not waiting 6 or 8 months for it to develop. So our numbers are sort of in that 20 to 30, 70 to 80%, right? 70 to 80% are getting better, but 20 to 30 might not be doing as well. So let's keep an eye on that as we go through the month together. Then the other thing that's interesting is, in my mind, one of the concerning pieces is this is going to be building upon itself, right? So if we have even 5,000 people a year who end up with really significant chronic Lyme symptoms, if you take that over 10 years, well, that's 50,000, right? And then we keep adding all those numbers up. And, Brown did this evaluation, and they said probably by the end of 2020, which is already passed by a couple of years, there would be just shy of 2 million people with post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome. And the thing that's really happening here is that in here, we're seeing more and more that post-treatment Lyme syndrome and chronic Lyme disease, which again, we'll talk more about in depth later on, but both of those things could be similar, and there's probably a little bit of each. So I think there's a bit of truth on both sides. And, one of the questions that I just saw pop up in the chat has to do with why the CDC and the NIH won't help us, and I think it feels like that a lot. I actually just got back a few weeks ago from a Global Lyme Alliance scientific conference, and you would probably be amazed at who showed up at that. These are researchers and frontline clinicians that you probably are thinking are on the other team. They're starting to see this evidence, and they're participating in the research that is helping to move this field forward. So they may have been in a different place in the past, but they're starting to see the evidence is building and building. And one of the things I always say is there's more evidence for chronic Lyme disease than there is for cure of Lyme disease. But again, let's work through the month together, get this information, get it out to everybody. But I will say now, compared to like 7 or 10 years ago, there's a lot more people who are starting to understand this. And I think that that's really great news. Has it taken way too long? Yes. But the thing for me, and I just want to throw this out there, is I think that like the chronic Lyme group is over here and the no chronic Lyme is over here. And the reality is they both have some of the truth. And I think we need to stop fighting each other, pretending that we each own the truth, and just realize that there's a whole spectrum, and we need to come back to the middle and focus on patients. And that's why I'm going to be presenting you with a lot of data this month in a way that we can bring this together so that we can truly bring people together. Because in the end, I don't care whose team you're on. I don't care what your opinion is. I would know the science is going to bring us together so we can focus on getting people well. And we need to get people who are suffering better and not just keep screwing around fighting. And we're moving in that direction, which is really great. Yeah, still no help from the insurance. No kidding, right? We're getting there. And I would agree. There's a comment about we're still getting gaslit. There's no doubt. But what I'm saying is we can either fight them and gaslight them, or we could start to take the higher road. Now, I know that this is easy for me to say because I've been better for the last 12 years after 13 years of my life being kind of, put sideways by this. But I work in this every day. And honestly, from my bottom of my heart, all I really want to do is help all of you get better. And I think the best way to speed that along is to bring people together. And the other thing, though, I will say is the pure scientists out there are seeing what you're experiencing. There are people working on new testing methodologies that are combining antibodies and T cells, that are doing all kinds of other things. Even the crazy people who are working on the vaccines are actually understanding, hey, the previous one didn't do what we wanted it to do. Can we remove those things? Can we do something that would work, right? So people are seeing it. Even if we don't agree with, say, vaccination, or we don't want their test, we want a different test, people are seeing that we need to do something different, and they're working on it. But the biggest problem is we need to get it covered by insurance, as was noted. We need to stop gaslighting people. And we also need money for research. And that's why groups like Global Lyme Alliance are so great, because they're raising money and donating this money. The challenge is we need huge amounts of cash to make this go even faster. But the research is being done. It's really cool. So if we get back to here, one of the things I always want to know is like, what's in a tick, right? So at least in New York and Connecticut in 2019, we saw about 10% of the ticks had anaplasma. Borrelia burgdorferi is about 56%. And on the East Coast, depending upon where you are, 30 or 40% is the lowest, kind of the low infectivity rate, upwards of 70%. One year in Connecticut, some of the tick drags were showing 90% of deer ticks had Lyme. We've got Babesia, microti, and otocoilii at about 8.5%. If you'll notice, there is no Babesia dunnicani because it's never been found on the East Coast. We'll dive into that. There's a reason for that, and we'll talk more about that. One of the things we don't hear a lot about is Rickettsia burkneri. So I wonder if we're ever going to find out that's a human pathogen, because for 30 plus years we said Borrelia miyamotoi was not. Turns out it is. And then we've got a few other things, including these viruses. But the thing is, there are a lot of things in ticks, and they are cesspools. The other thing, actually, I should say, if you also see conveniently not here, is Bartonella henselae. So this conversation, is Bartonella henselae actually a tick-borne infection? Well, the work out of Dr. Breitschwart's lab with Dr. Magi shows that Bartonella henselae is found in some ticks across the United States, but in particular regions, it's a lot higher. It's like 4 times higher here in North Carolina. And Borrelia burgdorferi is only 14% kind of from across the United States in these different ticks. But in North Carolina, Borrelia species was a lot higher. So there is a regionality to some of this, and that's important to understand too. So one of the things that's really important is tick bite prevention. Right. We're not going to have chronic Lyme disease if we never get Lyme. So let's try to not, do that. One of the most important things to me is understanding that Lyme is paradomestic. So many people are like, oh, I don't go hiking in the woods. I don't go camping anymore. The thing is, 75% of people get Lyme in their yard or their friend's yard or the park around the corner. So paradomestic means just like that, around your house, right? So ticks and mice love edge. And edge is what it sounds like. It's right the edge between the woods and this beautiful groomed lawn. So when we make a garden, we create even more edge. And when we make this beautiful backyard, we create an edge. When we take our swing set and we put it into the corner, guess what? We just put our kids right at the highest risk area, because the edge is about 10 feet into the woods to the 10 feet out. The further away you go deeper into the woods, or the further you come out into the yard, the safer you are. So instead of putting your swing set over in the corner, we really need to put it out in the middle of the yard further away, and that can improve things. Now, Kirby Statford from the Connecticut Agricultural Experimentation Station has this great booklet on Lyme and co-infections and all things in Connecticut. He did this schematic about ways that you could create a mitigation zone in your yard, right? So we have like our kind of the backwoods, like our greenways that we all want to have and stuff. But he's like, hey, put this barrier that's about 3 feet or more, and stone chips can help, right? But then after we have a little bit of a barrier there, we want to have this mitigation zone. So a lot of our things need to be out here. It's interesting about deer. We're finding conflicting evidence. Some feel deer are a really big problem here. There's some preliminary research at the University of Binghamton that showed ticks on mice in their area were highly infected with Borrelia burgdorferi, but ticks that were feeding on deer only had about 2.5 to 3% infectivity. So there's some research going on to say maybe deer aren't really the problem and they could actually be inoculating ticks. Too early to know what's going to come of that, but we definitely want to just keep our yards kind of cleaned up like this. And yeah, I see over, it's hard to keep track of all the comments as we're talking here, but the part about the stress is huge. And that's going to come up through a lot of what we do, whether we're the patient experience it, the caretaker, or a caretaker and a patient. Because I see a lot of parents who are sick and their kids are sick. And we're going to be giving you some really great tools towards the end of the month, especially in week 5 to work with that. So in the yard, one of the things I have used is this Nix Ticks system, and they're Nix Ticks, NIXTICKS.com. They have different places throughout New England, and they basically combine a bait box where the chipmunks and the mice, the rodents that are the vectors of Lyme, are going and getting fipronil, which a lot of us know as Top Spot that we use on our dogs, and they're getting their coat treated, and then we also spray the yard a couple of times a year. Now, it is a toxic substance when it's wet. When it dries, it's primarily non-toxic. I looked through the material data sheet that shows toxicity. It's really at the low end, but it is a toxic substance. But so is getting Lyme disease. It's been shown that if you do this for 2 years in a row, you can decrease the percent of infected nymph ticks on your property by to less than 2%. So that's really great, and that's what I used in Connecticut as well. The other thing is DEET is not an arachnid, is essentially not an anti-tick insecticide. So it's not really going to work. And if you ever spray it on a plastic Band-Aid and wait about 15 seconds and take a gloved finger and rub it, you'll actually rub the plastic Band-Aid completely apart. So DEET's kind of gross. If you have to use it, you can use it. Cedar oil is one of the things that's a natural DEET-free alternative. But one of the things I really, really like is that you can take permethrin and spray, which is basically will kill ticks and a lot of other things, as we'll see in a minute. And you can spray your sneakers and your socks, and it will result in a 73.6-fold reduction in the likelihood of tick bite compared to somebody who has untreated footwear. So you don't even need to put it on your clothes, just your socks and your shoes, and you can decrease your risk of tick bite by almost 74 times. That's pretty amazing. So if you're out in the yard, if your kids have regular outdoor shoes, make sure you're putting it on there. Then where you get that's the Sawyer permethrin. This is toxic when it's wet, especially to fish and aquatic life. In cats, they can also have some pretty significant issues, so be careful. When it's dry, it's usually really good. There are some topicals for cats with low amounts of permethrin. If we use this for scabies in humans at a dose that's 10 times as concentrated as it is on the one that we need for our clothes, right? So it's non-toxic when it dries. If you do it yourself, you're going to get about 6 or 8 washes before it needs to be redone. You can also go to Insect Shield. They'll treat your clothing. They have different size bags. Whatever you can put in that bag, they'll treat for you, and it's actually going to last a lot longer. And the reason that it's important is, hey, maybe I want myself professionally treated if I'm going out, for ticks, but also mosquitoes and fleas and chiggers and all the lovely things. The reason I have double stars on lice there. Lice are one of the things that transmit Bartonella to people. If you head over to our YouTube channel or even any of the podcasting platforms, you'll see my interview with Ed Breitschwert. He's finding that people are exposed to Bartonella. It's almost like a rule, not an exception. The question is, are they still sick from it? But let's prevent it. And then also, there's a question about LL Bean, REI, and other outdoor stores where they're selling these permethrin impregnated clothes. And absolutely, some of them are from Insect Shield, some are from some other organizations. But yeah, same idea. Professionally treated, it'll last a bit longer. And a quick question about transmission of Lyme. I will hold off on that because we're about to get there. And so anyway, one of the things I wrote a thing for Men's Health a long time ago, how to keep ticks off your nether regions. One of the things I love, permethrin on my shoes and socks, and then compression shorts and maybe a compression sock, because the ticks like warm, dark areas. So if we can keep them out of our groin with just sort of like an active short thing, and it's like stylish these days, it's getting easier and easier. Just give an occlusive layer so it's not getting into the high risk areas. And then even if you want it on your upper body, so it's not in your armpits, and then we just have to look at the ears and the hair. Not to say they don't bite other places, but that can help decrease the places you need to look. If you take your clothes off and put them either in the dryer immediately, usually 15 or 20 minutes will desiccate or dry out the tick. Depends on if you have gas or electric. Gas could be longer, or if it's propane, it could be even more long, but it just has to get pretty hot. Or you put them in a bag and deal with it later. I recommend taking a shower right away and certainly do daily tick checks. Question about permethrin with bees. I don't know if permethrin kills bees dry. I have not heard that it does, but certainly wet, I would keep it away from just about everything except maybe my own skin. Although when I'm doing it, I like to take care of I like to have the gloves on as well. And picarin can work. It's just not as much. And then one of the things that we're talking about in the chat is like picarin is good for your skin and your clothes, but maybe permethrin only your clothes. But the truth is, not your skin. But the truth is, our scabies treatments are a much higher dose. Definitely don't get it in your mouth or your nose, your eyes. I wouldn't go out of my way to spray my skin. That's pretty stupid. However, it can be helpful. And I will strongly disagree with some of the comments in the chat in just a moment about tick transmission. Researchers have found that ticks, that mosquitoes do carry Lyme disease. I would love to see the paper where it shows that they transmit it. They don't have a mechanism to transmit it, and Borrelia can only live for about 5 hours in ticks. So there's a lot of talk about mosquitoes. A lot of my colleagues talk about it. Is it possible? There's one case report from 1996 where they reportedly a horsefly transmitted Lyme disease. Challenge is the horsefly bite looks a lot like a Lyme bite, but it is really, really important. And to clarify, Borrelia can only live about 5 hours in a mosquito, not in a tick. They can live, ad nauseum. So we just need to be aware of the fact that there's a lot of bullshit out there. And that's one of the things I'm here to do is say the truth as of today is what we know. And I love the truth because the truth could change next week with a new paper. In fact, tomorrow somebody could publish something that changes everything we know about this. And that's what keeps it exciting, because there's so much we don't know. We need to keep working with researchers to find out. But just like we'll get to it, but there's other modes of potential transmission of Lyme and Bartonella in particular, but they're not confirmed. And then the more we talk about the ones that we don't know about as a primary source, we take away from the fact that ticks are our number one source of all these things, except possibly Bartonella, because that's transmitted, depending upon species, by a whole slew of things. So if you do get bit, one thing I want you to notice was this is a dog tick, not a deer tick. I could not find a picture that showed proper removal of a deer tick, so I didn't want to use it. A lot of the ones in the deer ticks, they have them holding way up here. We want to hold right at the skin, and we want to lift and hold straight up. Don't yank them. Don't twist them. Don't use essential oils. All this is a bunch of craziness because this mouth part gets with the barbs is getting stuck under your skin, and we need the tick to have time to release those. So we lift and hold. This could take 10 seconds. It could take 30 seconds. I've had people where it took over 2 minutes, but it will release and come out. We don't want to be doing the twisting and all the, like my dad, when we were kids, would burn them with matches or cigarettes and stuff. Vaseline. The thing is, the spirochete is living primarily in the tick midgut. And if we piss off the tick and it's stuck in us with barbs, how can it get out? Right? The only way it can escape quickly is jet propulsion, AKA puking into you. So you took a tick that had not transmitted Lyme to you and you gave yourself Lyme. So get some needlepoint tweezers, have them floating around, lift and hold. If you've got the little V ones, slide that in deep around those mouth parts, lift and hold. There is some evidence that there's possible that we can find Borrelia spirochetes in the tick salivary glands. So it is possible, theoretically, that we could have transmission of Lyme near instantaneously when it injects its anticoagulant and its anesthetic. And this goes to talk about, hey, the minimum amount of time that Lyme or that a deer tick has to be attached to transmit Lyme is 36 to 48 hours. The problem is we don't know what the minimum attachment time is. We know that the first day, less than 5% of adults, which feed for about 5 days, will transmit. And every day after that, it goes exponentially higher. Nymphs feed for about 4 days, so compress that. But the problem is, we know that in animals, it can happen in less than 16 hours. So this is a really big deal that we don't know the minimum rate. Now, in Kirby Stafford's booklet that I was referring to earlier from the early 2000s, he notes that in as little as 8 hours, there's evidence of anaplasmosis, which is just another infection from the same tick that can be transmitted. I know of at least 3 cases of transmission of Borrelia burgdorferi with tick attack that are in the medical literature that are less than 24 hours. And I actually had one where I had in my private practice, myself and some other researchers submitted to the New England Journal of Medicine, and promptly we got a reply that said, thanks very much, interesting to know, our readers don't need to know about this. And if there's not something that pissed me off more than that, I don't know. I mean, it's just insane that the editors can choose that we're not going to be doing that, right? So how else can we get Lyme? Maternal fetal transmission has been shown both in live births and stillbirths. So this has been confirmed, right? How often it happens, we don't know, and it's probably not a lot, but it's probably a lot more than we'd like to think. So if someone is pregnant, we do want to keep an eye on that stuff. The other thing, all these other ones, blood transfusion, yes to Babesia, yes to Anaplasma. There's no evidence for Lyme disease. Breast milk transmission, we can find Lyme disease in breast milk. We can culture it. There's no confirmation of transmission. And I studied for years with Charles Ray Jones, the world-renowned, most amazing pediatric Lyme doctor ever, probably one of the gurus of Lyme in general, right? Top 2, 3 ever. And he said that, right? So that was his clinical experience, and the research experience shows in breast milk, but not proven to transmit. Now, granted, we have stomach acid and all this other stuff might do that. Sexual transmission. This has been discussed, debated by Lyme gurus, including Dr. Horowitz, Dr. Ligner, on stage at major events for the last 20-some years. The consensus that I've been able to come across is it's possible, but not probable. We know there's some research that Dr. Stricker put out with some others and Dr. Shappy that said out of like 30 people, 1 couple may have had the same strain of Lyme, which means it may have been sexually transmitted. But we have been trying to make it sexually transmitted and we can't prove it. Does that mean it's not sexually transmitted? Not at all. What it means is we have not yet been able to prove it. Have there been a lot of cases in many of our offices where somebody's getting a lot better and then they get sick again, then they get a lot better and they get sick again, then you talk to their partner, they've had these minuscule symptoms maybe of Lyme, they start using a barrier method, you treat both of them, they all get better? Yeah, absolutely. I was in Dr. Horowitz's office, he said it's possible but not probable. He basically gave me the same spiel I just gave you. And then on the other side of that, the couple sitting across the room while we're talking about it said, the woman goes, yeah, that's how he got it from me. So there's a lot of misconception out there. Is it possible? Yes. Have we been able to prove it? No. Should it be really easy to be able to prove that? It should be, if it is a true STD. But Lyme is tricky. It's been around for over 13 million years, way longer than human beings. So it's entirely possible. So let's stay tuned to that. The other thing I put other is for mosquitoes and all this other stuff. I mean, I've heard toilet seats. I've heard saliva. There are spirochetes in your mouth. They are not Borrelia spirochetes to the best of anyone's knowledge, other than marketers who want you to buy crappy products. So just beware, right? So the question is, that's good. The question is tick bites. You know, because this is the number one way it happens. I'm not saying it never happens in all the others, and I keep looking at the literature. Literally, I have a Google search that goes for Lyme disease, babesiosis, Borrelia, Miyamoto, like all of these. Every day, it skims the literature and sends me the new papers. So I really will make sure that I let you know if what I just said a minute ago changes, because that would be groundbreaking. But what do we do now? There's this thing called single-dose doxycycline, and in the New England Journal of Medicine paper where they published it said 87% efficacy. So what they said was the surrogate for a true Lyme diagnosis was actually just the single dose of doxycycline was used to prevent erythema migrans rash. The problem is this is not a validated model, and we know from the CDC at least 30% of people do not get an erythema migrans rash with Lyme. And then there's 40 to 60 people in the general medical literature, percent of people do not get an erythema migrans rash. So let's just call it, for sake of argument, 50-50. So already we know that the EM rash, 50% of people don't get it and they still have Lyme, right? And then the thing was, this whole study was not detected or was not designed to detect those people. So everybody who did not have an EM rash was considered to be negative. So we already know that about 50% of true positives would be left out of this study. And the problem was there were people who had seroconversion, meaning they went from negative on a blood test to positive and had signs and symptoms of Lyme without this EM rash, despite that being the diagnostic criteria for the study. So this is really not a good study. And failed treatment led to seronegative Lyme in another person. So the problem we also run into is if we don't do enough treatment, we can not prevent Lyme disease, but we can also prevent antibody from being formed. So essentially, you can create blood test negative Lyme disease by giving them a single double dose of doxycycline. So I typically don't recommend that. Other flaws in this study were there was a 6 weeks observation period. So they said if from bite and 2 doses of doxy at one time, 6 weeks, and you don't have Lyme. Problem is, we know that later manifestations can take months or years to develop. That's why we have late Lyme disease in the general medical literature. 6 months or longer out after tick bite is when this happens. So you can't just, so the study's totally flawed, and I would not recommend it. I would rather somebody just get Lyme the regular old way by not taking this, because then at least we have a chance to have antibodies form. We have a chance to have a rash form later on, and at least we don't knock down the load a little bit, let it hide in there, create chronic Lyme, and then have this insidious thing that we call fibromyalgia because we don't know they had an acute infection. So if we look a little deeper, though, are there other studies that look at this? And yes, there are. Single dose doxycycline in a mouse for Lyme disease was 43% effective. So that's pretty piss poor and not 87%. And then if you had co-infection of Lyme and anaplasma, a single dose of doxy went down to 20% efficacy for Lyme and 30% efficacy for anaplasma, which makes it so co-infection makes it harder to treat. And we'll talk a lot about co-infection in the next couple of weeks. Then in mouse studies, we wanted to look and see is there any more information. Well, doxycycline in a single long-acting injection that's roughly equivalent to 19 days in a human was 100% effective for both Lyme and anaplasma co-infection. So this is really the best information that we have on how to do a prophylactic treatment. So myself and many other people say, doxycycline for 20 days at a minimum as a preventive measure. Now, most of us round up to 21 because insurance companies are used to seeing 3 weeks rather than 21 days rather than 20, and we want to get it covered. But the reality is we really need to look at somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks, up to 6 weeks, and we need to reassess, right? And then one of the other things I always ask is why are we using doxycycline? Because I see out of the corner of my eye, doxy can have some side effects, and it does depend. Like we prescribe antibiotics, we talk about general understanding of things, and then we change it based on an individual's specific medical needs. Doxycycline is bacteriostatic against Lyme, meaning it'll stop Lyme from reproducing, but it's not bactericidal, meaning kills it, such as something like cefuroxime or amoxicillin. So why would we even use it? And the reason really is because there's other infections, right? And Borrelia miyamotoi is sensitive to this, and anaplasma. And when we look at anaplasma and its cousins from the other ticks, Rocky Mountain spotted fever and Ehrlichia, those can be life-threatening. So I think that this is why we still continue to use this as our go-to. Now in the summer, we have to be careful because we might see things like photosensitivity, right? So you can get more easily sunburn. You could have somebody, like we said in the comments, that maybe they can't take Doxy for some reason. They have an allergy. They have one of the medical conditions where it might be contraindicated. You know, if it's sunburn or nausea that we're worried about, minocycline might work. But some of these other medications are highly effective against Lyme. They're just, and probably Borrelia miyamotoi for all of those listed there, but not so much against anaplasma. And that's probably why most people are going with doxycycline out of the beginning. Now, we've got issues with children because the adults literature is really lacking. Children are lacking even more. But typically what we do is we're going to be doing a similar thing, and then we're going to be doing studies, or then we're going to be doing weight-based dosing. And in children under 8, we tend to use amoxicillin and cefuroxime. Doxycycline, we don't use for prophylactic treatment under 8. If there's a rickettsial infection, or we think there's one, and that's anaplasma or Ehrlichia, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, then we can use it at any age, and the CDC supports that. But my recommendation is, like, if you're doing a 4 to 6 week prophylactic treatment for Lyme alone and you don't suspect a rickettsial infection, it's probably not the right thing to do because you're putting children at risk. And then back here, one of the questions I see was, minocycline does have photosensitivity associated with, but it's dramatically less than doxycycline, AKA I've never seen it in minnow. I've heard about it, but rarely. Long-term use of minocycline can cause significant staining of everything from your lips, your skin, your shins, your teeth, your eyes, but not short-term. And by long-term, I mean like 3, 5, 10 years, not rarely is it any less than that. So the biggest thing, Doxy should be taken with food because it's very nauseating to a lot of people, and it causes a lot of pretty exquisite sunburn. Minocycline doesn't have those so much, but it does have a little more dizziness than a lot of these others. So just be aware of that. But what about things like herbs, right? We can, Dr. Alexis Chesney has this amazing book on preventing Lyme and other tick-borne illnesses. She does a lot of work with prevention, which I just applaud her for, because if we don't get Lyme, we don't get bit by a tick, we don't get Lyme most of the time. And if we can minimize the transmission, and early recognition will help. This is one of her formulas, Cryptolepis with Hetunia, Polygonum cuspidatum with and then Uncaria tomentosa. So we've got Japanese knotweed and cat's claw along with the other two. The problem is Cryptolepis is absolutely disgusting. So a lot of kids won't take it, and we need an alternative. And so she has one where she uses Hetunia, Mora, and Cemento. And Mora is a brand name from Nutrimetics. Cemento is cat's claw, again, a brand name from Nutrimetics, but that's how they're used. And we'll talk about children's weight-based dosing in just a moment. There's a couple of, there's a whole bunch of different comments in the chat. I'll try to get to some. Definitely tetracyclines, particularly minnow, can lead to things like pseudotumor cerebri. I've seen it. I don't see it a lot, especially in these shorter courses. We don't. I had somebody made a comment about getting Clostridium difficile. Later on in the month, we'll talk about prevention of C. difficile, and also sort of some natural ways to maybe, like, if you think you're starting to get it, to treat it really aggressively, so that we don't have that. I have seen it happen after like 6 years of continuous antibiotic therapy in a patient who at the time was on IV and no orals. And I've seen it happen in one single pill of azithromycin. And I've also seen people be on 2 pills of azithromycin twice a day for like 4 or 5 years and not have a problem. So we will definitely be focusing on the gut. And I just wanted to throw that out there because it's huge. And yeah, we need to find what works for us, for our antimicrobials, and for treating our, our C. diff. Right. And I think the other thing that I see in the comments is everybody's a unique individual. And this is part of what pisses off the conventional medical side of things is, once we get in the chronic land, a lot of people need different treatments that are very individualized. We can't put you on a Ford conveyor belt and just make a whole bunch of cars, right? Everybody needs to be taken care of as an individual. And part of the reason I structured this month this way is there's something in this for everyone. And you will all learn the thing that you need to learn. And then you're going to be like, oh my gosh, sometime you're going to go, somebody's going to be talking to you. And you're going to, oh my God, I remember in week 3 or maybe week 4, Dr. Tom was talking about this. We had a great discussion of it, and you can send them over to the replay and you can help change their lives too. But one of the things that's another big deal for me is I want everyone to compare notes. And I want the people who don't agree with each other to compare notes even more with an open heart and an open mind. But I really, really, really want us all to stop comparing our treatment journey, our treatment needs, and our own healing journey to everybody else. I want us to learn from it, but then all of us have our own unique journey. Like that map I showed at the beginning, it is what it is. Your journey is not going to look like mine, and nor should it. You're unique. You have something beautiful to learn, and there's some suffering along the way, but together we can share these different things. And so like this is a great example. This is Dr. Chesney's approach, 2 different ways. This is one of the things I might do based on, and her book was published before all the research came out, but Cryptolepis, Japanese knotweed, and Chinese skullcap, it respectively in here. We could use those 40 drops 3 times a day with adjustment for kids. But again, Cryptolepis tastes like crap, and maybe your kid likes it, maybe they don't. We might want to use something like an MCBB2 from Beyond Balance, because Beyond Balance is glycerin-based, and Susan McCamish's formulas tend to be more or less kid-friendly. IMNV4 probably wouldn't put in anybody's mouth. I did it once. My mouth burned for half a day. It did work, but MCBB2 is generally well tolerated by kids. VitalGuard Supreme is actually chrysanthemum extract. And so when we talked about permethrin, there's also a thing called pyrethrin. That is an herbal extract of chrysanthemum that could be used in place of permethrin, just hasn't been studied to be as effective. But you could do VitalGuard Supreme. That's from Supreme Nutrition Products. And then Cryptolepis, again, I like adding this in. And part of the reason, I leave that in here is it's the strongest thing. It's been published, at least in Petri dishes and test tubes, from the work from Dr. Zhang's lab down in Johns Hopkins, to be better than Doxy and cefuroxime for both growing and non-growing Lyme. It's great for Babesia duncani and Bartonella henselae. So if we get other things from ticks, we're covering a lot of that. But we might need to substitute. We might want to do AL complex from Byron White instead of BB2. We might want to do Crypto Plus from Research Nutritionals because it's got red root lomatium and a few other things along with Cryptolepis, and it doesn't taste anywhere near as bad. We might want to add or substitute whole leaf artemisia or liposomal artemisinin, and we might want to add in our Japanese knotweed. Again, a lot of the things that we're going to add in here are things that depends on what else is going on with the patient. And then we can adjust for kids. And how do we do that? This is a la Dr. Chesney. I really think this is a great starting point. If we take the adult dose and we call it 30 drops, right? And 150-pound ideal weight adult, right? We do this a lot in medication dosing. Then you put the kid's weight over it, and then you figure out the number of drops. But let's say we said here, MCBB2, we're going to do 45 drops in a day. Well, I might put 45 in place of that 30, figure out the math, and then just divide that in 2 or 3 doses as opposed to just what I said for the adult here. So that's kind of how you do that calculation. So really one of the things I think is so important is we need to know about risk of transmission, right? We want to know about the prevalence of microbes in the area where somebody was bitten. That's why we looked at Connecticut and New York, as well as a little smattering of the US, and then specifically down in North Carolina, because it's different. The departments of agriculture, or whatever it's called in your area, should have at least the primary pathogens in your tick reported, at least for the previous year, by the next summer. So at least you know kind of what's in the area. The duration of tick attachment does matter, but again, it could be near instantaneous transmission. We know of at least 3 published cases, and I know of at least 1 other where it was well under 24 hours from the time of the tick bite. And so But what we do need to know is day 3 and 4 or day 3, 4, and 5, if it's an adult, are the highest risk. So the more that tick is filled up, the higher it is. And those things help us make a decision whether to treat or not to treat. Now, and that's a decision you have to make with your provider. And also, the thing we need to remember is when we don't know the right answer, the Institute of Medicine said this in like 2009, there's usually a lot of controversy when it's not crystal clear. The other thing is when there's not a lot of, where it's not clear and there is a lot of controversy, that actually is a place where patient autonomy and patient preference in treatment goes up, up, up the ladder. You know, it's kind of like you go in the ER and you're having a heart attack and they go, do you want to live or not live? That's pretty much, you don't get to pick and choose which medicine in that acute setting because you don't have the knowledge to do it and it's too urgent. But when we're looking at this, there's so many options. That means your autonomy goes higher and higher and higher. And your physician or your other licensed practitioner needs to respect that and partner with you. And that's really where we make these decisions, right? So I would suggest that one of the most important, yeah, nothing is crystal clear in chronic Lyme disease. Well said, Roberta. Totally well said. One of the things we want to do is prevent tick bites. I mean, this is the most important thing. If you can do that, that's really the place to go. And then the other thing is, if you do happen to get bit despite all that, what are we going to do? And I think one of the biggest challenges with preventive treatments is that a lot of times we just do these open-ended things, and even long-term Lyme treatment. There are people who need years, right? But there are other people who don't. So that's why I always say we want to assess and reassess. So I said 4 to 6 weeks. Well, I usually give people 3 or 4 weeks of a prophylactic treatment. If all other things being equal, they want it. It all makes sense, right? They don't have any contraindications. But then before they run out, I check in with them and I ask them how they're doing, and we make an informed decision. But we don't just say, oh, you got bit by a tick, that's 4 months, right? And even chronic Lyme disease, even if you've been sick for 4 years, first thing I do, I treat you for 4 weeks, we reassess. Then we treat you for another 2 months, and then we reassess. Now, we may have a plan to continue for a long period of time, but we're always checking in. And this is what we've learned from things like the double dose dapsone protocols, our work with tafenoquine, all things that we're going to talk about later in the month, especially in week 4 for those two, that we definitely need to reassess. It's a critical aspect of this is that allows us to take in your unique physiology, your genetics, your response to treatments, your personal preferences. I've had people where their preferences change, and that's okay. So we want to talk about it, and that's why we reassess. So as promised, you know, one of the things that I wanted to do is give you guys a little bit of a gift. And if you want to head over to OriginsOfHealth.com, and go right here to the top. It says free resources. You can check out my top 5 supplements for healing chronic Lyme disease. And one of the things that you'll get in there is pictured here is I put an herb and pathogen chart together. So some of the major herbs that are going through the research, especially out of Hopkins and other places, are listed as to where they're working and what they're working for. So I think that can be a really helpful thing for you. And here in the chat, I will drop that in there for you so you can directly go there if you're interested. One other thing I did want to tell you before we wrap up and get to some Q&A is I'm doing a really exciting project with some friends of mine. We're calling it the Change Making Kids Conference, because so many children of people who are coming to events like this kind of are misfits these days, right? They're not doing as much social media. They're not doing as much gaming. They do this crazy thing like eat organic food. They know what mast cell activation syndrome is. They know the foods to avoid to not bother their eczema, or they might be gluten-free. And really, our goal is to help them rediscover their voice and embrace their uniqueness, or the uniqueness that their parents, like like in our house, our parents have guided our children to do, and really learn from themselves and other trailblazing children on how to really make that change. And also for adults, parents and grandparents to know how to do this. And in addition to that, we're looking for kids to foster long-term relationships with each other. So I'm going to drop a quick chat in there. or the quick thing to the Change Making Kids Conference. If you or anyone you know has a kid or is interested in learning how to lead kids better or have your kids come to the conference, we're doing it at the end of June, just outside of Chicago. It's going to be a lot of fun in a state park. It's called Starved Rock State Park in Oglesby, Illinois. Going to have a great time, and just wanted to share that because life really still happens, right? And one of the ways that we allow our children and ourselves to have a healthy immune system is less screen time, is less processed food, less sugars, eating a healthy diet, knowing how to support your microbiome, knowing how to get dirty, when to get dirty, and when not to get dirty, right? And also how to use social media properly without it just sucking the life out of us, making it a comparison thing. So just want to do a little public service announcement there. So it should be a lot of fun. So there you have it. We've got tick bites and tactics tonight. We'll do some Q&A now and hopefully hit all the questions and look over the chat for the things I missed. Just a quick reminder, we're going to be doing Beyond the Bite next week for acute Lyme. We're going to then dive into chronic things. We're going to look at chronic Lyme symptoms, co-infection a bit more, a little bit on testing. We're going to start to talk about sort of our, basics of chronic Lyme treatment. And then week 4, we're really going to talk about cutting edge treatment. We're going to be diving into things like dapsone, tefenoquine, even disulfiram, a lot of different herbal approaches, and some unique things that you may not have heard of before. And then on the last week, again, we're going to do Breaking Free. I'm going to share with you some of my personal practices, things I share with my patients, things I share with my family, my daughter, and practices that we do as a family. And actually, I just got back from a retreat with other health practitioners where we were taking care of ourselves because we give so much, that we really always need to take care of ourselves. And I'm going to be going through a live healing session very similar to the one I did with them. And it just blew people's mind. And I hope it will for you too, and really help you go to that next level. So I want to say thank you so very, very much. And I think I will unshare and look at the Q&A here because I know we have a lot of stuff. So there is a question, I think, from about an hour ago at this point. Can mold cause candida? Or is Lyme treatment more likely the culprit due to antibiotics? So mold doesn't cause candida, but mold is a fungus like candida, and mold could change the microbiome of your gut because it is actually bactericidal, let me restate that. Certain mycotoxins, so toxins from mold, can be bactericidal and actually kill off the good bacteria in your gut. So that would lead to what we would call dysbiosis, right? The imbalance of the good bad. And not only do we have a microbiome, but we have a mycobiome, right? A fungal portion of that microbiome. And if there's an imbalance in there because of the presence of these mold toxins, you could certainly have it be easier for yeast to come in, candida yeast. Now, Lyme treatment, any antibiotic could lead to more dysbiosis and directly to yeast. And then certainly the standard American diet and a lot of the stressors we're under can lead to that as well. So thanks so very much for that one. Yeah, there was a comment that the numbers from the CDC may not be the best. I think the thing is, I remember a handful of years ago, and I'm sure the person who wrote that, who knows who this is, knows that it used to be 24,000 and then it was 25 and 26, 28. So at least we went from about 36,000 new cases to about 500,000 cases. The reality is it's probably way, way, way more than that, right? I talk to a lot of osteopathic friends who are in Connecticut and New England. They're doing manual medicine, and they're always like, but who hasn't been exposed to Lyme? And I think and that's the same thing when you watch the podcast with Ed Breitschwart. Who hasn't been exposed to Bartonella, right? There are people, but it's becoming less and less common. The question is, whose immune system and body is strong enough to fight it off? I've seen people where they've never had an antibiotic or an herb for Lyme that have completely treated it. They have no symptoms. They've got crazy antibody response. Half the family has crappy antibody response, immune system dysregulation, and they're sicker than snot. So it depends on a lot of factors. So I think it's important, to know that. And I think those numbers are low. And I even like Brown's estimate of about 2 million are post-treatment Lyme. I said, look, most post-treatment Lyme is probably still active chronic Lyme. We'll talk about our opinions on that in the future, probably in week 3. But it's important to understand that these are guides. These aren't, that's where we have to go. How many are retested post-treatment and, let's see, infections often not cleared. So, I don't think we have a really good understanding of who's better and who's not better. Our biggest challenge in that is, what is the definition of chronic Lyme disease? We can't agree upon it. And more importantly, we can't get a definitive diagnosis. And one of the things that's coming out of COVID that might actually be good, believe it or not, is that we're getting these advances in testing, especially with like digital droplet PCR. So when we do studies, like we can do a PCR on one sample 40 different times. And if it's positive one time, it counts as positive. But most of the time, if you go to Quest or LabCorp or most labs, even some of the good ones on our list, one time they run the PCR sample and they say it's negative or it's positive. But if we ran it another 39 times and one of those was positive, that'd be a different story. I know that in IGeneX's new culture enhanced PCR, they run it 3 times after the 6-week culture, so that can help. The problem is we don't know how to define it for sure. We know the symptoms that people are suffering with, but the blood tests, we don't have like a confirmatory test, right? So we're going a lot clinical. How many are retested post-treatment? I retest a lot of people at different stages, depending upon their unique situation. Like I said, like I cleared infections. I haven't been sick in over 12 years. And anybody who knows me, I burn the candle at every single possible end and in the middle. But there's some people who are sick 12 and 20 years later. So the question is, let's keep diving into what it is. I know people like Dr. Darren Engels has said very commonly, he very rarely will retest. So there's a gamut between retest everybody all the time, check them every 3 or 4 months. Dr. Jones checked kids like every 4 to 8 months, depending upon when their follow-up was, but almost every follow-up. And I think a lot of us are somewhere in between always and never, and we do it based upon your individuality. I think it's really important. Yeah, and there's another question about, is ILADS working to become a research institution? And, are we able to kind of like really start to come together and stuff, similar to the Indian Health Service? I can't speak for ILADS. I've been acting president. I was on the board forever. I've done work for them, volunteer work forever. Been a member since like 2003 or 4 when I first learned about them, when I was going through my own health crisis. The thing is, I know that ILADS is working really hard on this. I know that Global Lyme Alliance is doing a ton of fundraising and research, but also public advocacy. They're bringing together people that you would think are Satan on the far right from the way they acted before. And actually, people are seeing the crack. They're seeing science is showing that chronic Lyme is more the rule than the exception. And people are starting to come together. We've got LymeDisease.org. We've got, the LDA, Lyme Disease Association, and a lot of other groups. I'm really fortunate. Later this month, I think it's the 3rd Tuesday, I'll be talking with the Illinois Lyme support group. They have tons of members. So there's a lot of groups coming together. We need to do more. The Health and Human Services Working Group, all that was great. We're making progress. Is it really way too slow? Yes. I think what we're learning, though, coming out of COVID is people are changing their minds about post-infectious syndromes. And they're looking, is it post-infectious immune hyperreactivity, immune dysregulation, immune suppression, and/or is it post-infectious persistence of infection? And like I said, in my mind, I look at it as it's all those things until we prove otherwise, because that's, as a doctor, I need to look at all the possibilities and then organize them. But I'm hearing that conversation, and I'm also, because I'm kind of on the inside of some of the research going on and on some of these medical advisory boards, I know there's researchers who are doing work that are going to be answering some of the questions y'all are asking and bringing us closer together as a medical community. And that work is probably coming out in the next year or 2. Maybe not as soon as we want, but that's a heck of a lot better than it was a decade ago when we were really far off. And then, there's a question about what is the truth about Plum Island experiments in creating Lyme disease. The thing is, Borrelia spirochetes have been found in ticks midguts. These are ticks that are preserved in amber that are over 13 million years old. So they are relatives. They're the genus Borrelia. So they're relatives of Borrelia burgdorferi. We don't really know when Borrelia burgdorferi came to be because we just started looking at it in the 70s with the whole outbreak of that JRA-like thing in Lyme, Connecticut. What we do also know is, I've said this so many times, has the government lied to me before? Yes. Are they probably lying to me about something right now? Absolutely. Will they do it again? Probably. Did they do something on Plum Island that was probably stupid with ticks? It certainly sounds like that might be the case. There's a lot of people who know a lot more about that than I do. There's a bunch of books on that. But the bottom line that I tell people is, when we're talking with other parents, when we're talking with other researchers, when we're talking with scientists, we're talking with doctors, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, nurses, the school, what should we lead with? Should we lead with conspiracy theory, or should we lead with science? And I usually say the answer probably is lead with the language that they're used to, which is science. If you want to get even more geeky on it, rickettsial infections, closely related to anaplasma and Rocky Mountain spotted fever, have been found in ticks that are over 100 million years old. So part of the problem is these things have been around forever and they know how to hide and persist in the environment. Now you take them and you put them in us. They're well adapted to living forever anywhere, including in us. And then you go and you take the probability or the possibility of it being messed with to even amplify it. Now you're making it look super crazy, and that's possible. So I lead with the science, and then I create the relationship, because my goal is the outcome, not to be right. I don't care if I'm right. If I say something and they disagree with me, and ultimately they come back and go, oh my goodness, chronic Lyme is a real thing and I need to start looking at it. Like, we've had Children's Hospital department chairs of infectious diseases, after scientific conversations, start treating PANS and PANDAS in kids with true symptoms, with negative labs, and seeing improvements on antibiotics, so they continued them. That was because we led with science. Now, if the person we're talking to, either we have longer term conversations and we want to talk about conspiracy theories and looking deeper into the information that supports those, let's go for it. If they bring it up, great, dive into it. But my mission is to get as many people humanly possible to look at this, be aware of it, so that we can prevent Lyme, we can treat it acutely, and if there's chronic, we need to have people who know it's there. And I want to bring them onto our team and continue. I'm not trying to get it all done in one conversation, I guess is what I'm saying. So thank you so much for that question, because I think that that's a huge one. And so, question about permethrin on clothes. It is reported to be non-toxic once it's dried. It's safe for kids. The biggest challenge is for aquatic wildlife and plants. So if you were to take that bottle of Sawyer's to camping and you accidentally dumped it in the river, you'd kill a ton of stuff. Once it's dry, it's pretty good. And certainly, as I mentioned, they're doing like a 0.5% permethrin. We use 5% permethrin to topically on adults and children for the treatment of scabies. So we apply it and then leave it on directly on our skin when it's wet for that. Now, I'm not recommending you do that. What you should do is put some gloves on, make sure you're in a well-ventilated area, spray it, let it dry, and then use it. But certainly don't super stress out about that stuff. Let's see. My whole family has been positive either by Galaxy or T Labs for Bartonella. How is it even possible? Couple things. There is case reports of Bartonella being vertically transmitted, meaning mom to child. There is the possibility in the same case report that mom gave it to dad, so meaning sexual transmission. It is not confirmed, but it's got a little bit more possibility in the literature than Lyme. But again, we're not there. The thing about Bartonella and Lyme is these are environmentally acquired illnesses. So meaning you guys are hanging out in the same place. So a lot of people are like, hey, three of us got Lyme, and we go outside a lot together and stuff. Why is one person get treated with this, another person get treated with that? Well, one, you're a unique individual that's only partially genetically the same if you're in the same family. But if you got Lyme, you probably got bit by a different tick. Now, Bartonella is interesting. Bartonella can be transmitted by lice, by fleas, by flies. And now people talk about their cats with cat bites and scratches. It's actually, when you get a cat bite or scratch, it's the flea poop of the flea that's on the cat that's giving you the Bartonella. The cat's just opening up the hole that gets it into you. So if your cat has Bartonella, you're probably not going to be able to excuse me, you probably won't be able to eradicate it, but it won't make a difference because that's not how you're getting the Bartonella. You just want to keep the fleas off of your cat. And if you're interested in more information about that, I'll try to grab over on the YouTube channel. If you check out my interview with Dr. Ed Breitschwart, you can watch the video version or you can just listen to the audio version. We dive a lot deeper into that topic. So hopefully that's helpful for you as well. And then let us see. So I'm going to just scroll back in the comments just a little bit here, make sure we got everything. If anybody else has any questions before we wrap up, please feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the webinar chat. I'm just going to scroll down and make sure we cover that. And I really want to say thank you for your all being here. I really appreciate the activity in the chat too. We don't all have to agree on everything, right? We need to have a conversation. I'm going to go on, I'm going to be careful what I say here because I have had gotten yelled at before for things like this. The recent viral pandemic, we did not have the ability to have a conversation about the vaccination, right? So I think that that's a horrible travesty. Irregardless of what side you're on, what we do in medicine traditionally is we have an opinion, we do a study, we publish it, and then we have a conversation about it. We have a conversation in the medical literature. We have a conversation in the hallway at the hospital. We go to conferences, we have a conversation. And sometimes those conversations end up as mild arguments. But then all the people come together and we talk about it and we see where do we need to do more research and what from the research we currently have can we put into clinical work. And a lot of times we agree to disagree. And we can have different opinions until we have more evidence of what to do. And when we stifle that, that's a challenge to me. I think that's a problem because we forget the number one thing. Patients are suffering. And if my ego is so big that my opinion is the only one that counts, or that my read of the literature is the only one that could possibly be true, I'm doing a disservice to the patients that I'm serving. So I really want to say thank you for sharing in the chat because that's one of the most important things is we have a conversation, let's keep scanning through. A child got bit on the hand at age 2, still has a rash at 11 years later, no other symptoms, told it was likely a spider bite. Depending upon what the rash looks like, you can definitely get kind of permanent discoloration scarring from a spider bite, much more commonly than a Lyme rash. A Lyme rash would have been potentially possible, but it'd be very unlikely. But what we do sometimes see with Lyme is that a rash could be recurrent, meaning it was there and it went away, and then it came back and it went away, and it came back and went away. And there's an earlier study, and forgive me, I don't remember all the details, but there was a bite. They took patients with a bite and erythema migrans at the bite site. They then treated them, and what I don't remember was it was 3 or 6 weeks. I think it was 6 weeks of intravenous ceftriaxone. So they've already gone way beyond anything most people would get. And there is about 2% of the people in that study, 10 months later, when they biopsied the site, where they had living spirochetes still there. Now, if we extrapolate and we see about 50% of people get a rash and 50% don't. Now we're at about 4% of people who would have a chronic infection at the bite site. So Lyme loves fibroblasts, these skin cells. So it certainly could be there, but it wouldn't tend to just be a rash that stayed there. And spider bites can lead to some pretty gnarly scarring. And I think the good news about that question is if there's no other symptoms, the likelihood of being 9 years out and not having any symptoms is pretty low. Is there a tried and true way? I love this question. Thank you. Is there a tried and true way to treat? Meaning, must you treat mold first? Must you treat Lyme first? Must you do something else first? I've heard everything from, I'm a Lyme doctor, so I treat Lyme first, to you got to treat mast cell activation, you got to treat mold, then you got to treat Bartonella, then you got to treat Lyme. Well, it's kind of hard to treat Bartonella without treating Lyme, so that one's out the window. The way I look at it is, we need to do a really great history and we need to talk to that person and we want to find out when it happened. I talked to somebody just today, in fact. She said, hey, my Lyme symptoms are back. And I'm like, well, what happened? Well, like 5 weeks ago, she started, this transcranial magnetic stimulation to help with mood that came out of Lyme disease. She was fine before Lyme, got Lyme. A lot of the physical symptoms went away and had some stuff left over, was doing all right, but then the mood was kind of whatever, started this treatment. Like 2 weeks later, all hell broke loose. And she's like, oh, it looked like when I first had Lyme. I go, but when did it start? Well, it seemed like it started after this new treatment, right? And it's mostly the cognitive and the emotional symptoms associated with Lyme, not any of the physical symptoms. So I said, let's keep an eye on it. She only has 3 more weeks of treatment left, but we are doing a treatment, which is monitoring. Well, actually, we did. This is a case where we decided to add herbals because I picked herbs that would bring down nervous system inflammation and support her gut while also killing Lyme and Babesia if they were present. But we did that as a safety net, but our primary treatment was monitoring what's going to happen. Now, she has the ability to call me at any time, and we can change our decision and maybe look at antibiotics, but the timeline didn't make sense. So then we have somebody like, who has a big mold exposure, and then like 8 months later, they're diagnosed with Lyme. Well, when did it start? It started after I moved into the mold, right? So we need to look at each unique individual. If they have a ton of mast cell symptoms, maybe you should look there. I will foreshadow a little bit of what's coming towards the end of the month, because not only are we going to dive into the advanced protocols and give you guys an amazing healing session, I've got a special announcement that we're going to do either week 4 or 5. And one of the things that I want to do is have one of the things that I love doing is bioenergetic scanning to find out, do people even have the foundational energy like in their battery to even tolerate this treatment? So much of the mast cell activation, so much of the treatment resistance is that we don't have the strength within. We could use peptides, but we can also use bioenergetics treatments to help that. And that can work in a month or 2 or 3. I have a particular patient who saw another provider for over 3 years, saw me for like 8 months, and nobody was making any progress. I'm like, we really need to do this scan and these treatments. So we backed up and we started at the pure foundational level. Is the energy flowing through his body, allowing him to detoxify, allowing his immune system to actually function without being all dysregulated and freaking out? And within 6 weeks, he was feeling better for the first time in over 4.5 years, right? And there were no antibiotics. Now, the question is, were all the antibiotics he did and then followed by herbs that didn't seem to do anything back then, could we see the benefit of doing them because we gave his battery a recharge, right? So I love giving the battery a recharge as we're doing the rest of these. And a lot of this helps us figure that out. So thanks so much. Great question. So Bart, there's a question about Bartonella treatment. Does it depend on what kind of Bartonella you have? If I start with Lyme for a second, Lyme or other Borrelias and then tick-borne relapsing fever Borrelias, to the best of our knowledge, they're mostly treated the same. When we look at Babesia microti, we know that from a medicine perspective, atovaquone and azithromycin do a pretty good job, and clindamycin can be used in there as well. The other thing is we know that those 3 medications in the traditional ways do not work for Babesia duncani. We have new literature that literally came out this January from Dr. Ben Mamoun's lab in Yale showing tafenoquine and atovaquone work for both Babesia duncani and Babesia microti in a mouse model, and it will eradicate the babesiosis. So prior to that coming out, I would say Babesia microti and duncani are treated differently. And what we really knew is Babesia duncani, we knew what herbs would work for it, but not what meds worked for it. And for Babesia microti, we knew what meds worked, and we had a little information on herbs, but not a lot. Now we have a lot more there. So we need more research, but that's different. When we go to the question about Bartonella, to the best of our knowledge, we really need to treat them. They're all relatively treated the same. Now, can I really say that? Because everybody I treat for Bartonella, I change up and I do all kinds of things, but that's our prevailing knowledge. And the truth be told, most of what we know about Bartonella treatment is because of its kissing cousin brucellosis, which is well studied in the world literature. And we know that if we treat it for 6 weeks with doxycycline, we have like 50% relapse rates. If we treat for 10 months with doxy, and another intracellular antibiotic, we have like still over 20% relapse. And we need to treat with doxybacterium and rifampin for over 18 months to get our relapse rates below 5%. So what we're learning about double and triple intracellular coverage in Bartonella really started in brucellosis because there was a lot more research done on that. So we don't really know the answer to your question, but at the moment we think we just need to treat Bartonella, whatever the species, right? But there's probably some strains that could be treated better one way or the other. We just don't have that knowledge yet. Is PEMF good for Lyme and co-infections? I love PEMF, pulse electromagnetic field. I use it a lot for all kinds of stuff, including musculoskeletal things like injuries and just being achy after sports. Certainly, certain people have amazing benefit from PEMF. I wouldn't say across the board it's great for everybody, because it's like, it's interesting. Rife is great for some people. PEMF is great for some people. I wouldn't say PEMF is going to be bad unless you just overdose. I've certainly had people start on like a 25% intensity for like 20 minutes, and I have to go down to 1% to get them up. But again, I use PEMF to help balance out the energy pathways in the body, not thinking specifically about the infection, because your body doesn't think about the infection. Your body thinks about healing. Your body thinks about living. So the way your physiology works is there's something going on, your body identifies it and works on it, but it doesn't get stuck on the label. It's just like, I need everything working on board to get rid of this. So I found PEMF actually quite helpful for a lot of that. How early is it, or how important is it to test and treat the gut early on? Since my understanding, like 70, 80% of the immune system is in the gut, as well as, like 90+% of our serotonin. And then I would add in, same thing for your GABA. So much of your GABA, which is an inhibitory neurotransmitter that brings down, like puts the roof on anxiety. It lets you have kind of your baseline anxiety response to make sure you're safe, but it prevents you from going crazy. GABA is all about your gut too. And then, so I look at the gut again. Mold can cause gut problems. Diet can cause gut problems. Trauma and emotional stuff can do it. Stress can do it. On and on. Diet, I don't remember if I mentioned, and so many things. So if it's a priority for that patient, then it's a priority for me. I prioritize the gut, and a lot of people start in the gut talking about terrain and stuff. So I definitely prioritize it sooner. But if people aren't having symptoms that look like the gut, I might go a little later. My preferred test for the gut right now is the GI Effects Comprehensive Stool Analysis in a 3-day sample. Some of the other things out there are good. I just find but Genova and Doctor's Data are the most reliable in my experience. And there are certainly others that are mentioned there. And it's really, there's a comment about a lot of other doctors don't know what the heck is going on, don't have a clue about the gut. And it's crazy to me. I mean, we go to medical school and they're like, most of our immune system's there. It's besides our skin, it's our number 2 major organ of detoxification. We all know about constipation and diarrhea. We all know about gut infections. We all know that the vagus nerve connects from the brain down to the gut, and 3/4 of the gut is run by the vagus nerve. The other part is parasympathetics coming out of our sacrum, which are back in the head, basically connected to the vagus. We know that the vagus also goes to the heart. So we know there's a feedback loop between the gut to the brain to the heart and vice versa. I'm with you. I don't know why we don't do more. And we see so many people overcoming chronic inflammatory problems, inflammatory bowel disease, all variations of autoimmunity. I was actually talking to Darren Engels a bunch of years ago, near dear friend of mine, he's the author of The Lyme Solution, which was one of the best books out there on Lyme, from what can you do for yourself perspective, as opposed to what do you need the doctor to help you with. And one of the things that we talked about is, like, we're good friends with Terry Walls, who got herself out of a tilt recline wheelchair from MS, and now is helping other people, heal and cure their MS. It's like, and then we look at like all kinds of other diets, and you're like, everybody online who's publishing all these things, you go to Amazon, all the autoimmune cures, it's all just taking the crap out of your diet, getting rid of the gluten, the dairy, if there are problems for you. And then everybody manages it a little different, but it's basically cleaning up your diet and your, not only your oral diet, what you're putting in your mouth, but what you're putting into your mind and your heart. And we'll talk more about that later in the month. But that's a really important thing, to make sure that we are healing like our gut, that we are feeding our gut what we want it to experience, because it's our primary organ of everything. that gut reaction, if you're dealing with a lot of stress and your gut's all like this, that feeds back to your brain and to your heart. Uh, when I'll teach you different ways to get into quick coherence and improve your heart rate variability later on in the month. Improve heart rate variability, improve stress resilience, improved. Oh, I love all these things. I turned this off the other day, but they're back. Improved immune function, improved stress tolerance, improved resilience to infection. So improving your heart rate variability. And one of the greatest things to do is to balance your heart, your brain, and your gut all together. And we'll teach you how to do that. Rife is another big topic. It's an energetic diagnostic and treatment tool. And again, it comes out of cancer research, I think in the 20s. It can work really well for some people and not as well for others. The people I know have the best results with Rife, though, all do bioenergetic treatment first for 6 to 12 months before they incorporate the Rife, and that's the people who do the best on that. And we can talk more about that towards the end of the month. I don't know a lot about hyperthermia treatment in Germany, other than they do it there. I know some people have talked about miraculous healings. That part of the theory makes sense. The other thing is there's promises of miracle cures all over the place, and I don't know a lot of people who have miracle cures. What I know is that when you work at it for months to years consistently, you do diligently a little bit every single day, and you make that momentum, you're more likely to heal. Are there people where it is the be all end all? Probably. And certainly the thing to know about hyperthermia, if it's not done right, you can go a little bit too high, which you don't have to go much over 106 to have permanent brain damage. So if you're going to look into it, make sure you've done your research, your due diligence, know the risks and benefits, and make sure you go into a highly reputable place. Question about intermittent fasting for Lyme disease. I do think that one of the most important things we can do is give a trial of intermittent fasting. For anyone who might not know, that's where we shorten our eating window. Ultimately, we try to make a period of the day where we have a 16-hour fasting window, and then an 8-hour feeding window. Some people will go even as crazy as a 4-hour eating window. I know at least 2 or 3 people who do 1-hour eating windows. That's a bit extreme. There is some new information out that always intermittent fasting can lead to more cardiovascular problems than the biohackers would like us to think. But there are a couple of things that promote autophagy, right? And autophagy is intracellular cleanup, intercellular recycling. So this is going to take old dead parts of like the mitochondria that aren't working anymore, get rid of them. But it'll also, because it's intracellular cleanup, it'll help get to some of these intracellular pathogens like Lyme and Bartonella. So let's use our human physiology for this. Things that can do that: cold exposure, having your fuel level go low, which is fasting, exercise, right? And it's a mix of both resistance, like weightlifting, as well as cardio. It's not just one or the other, it's a combo. And then the other thing, you could do cold exposure like Wim Hof. But one of the other things that's really great, and we'll dive into this towards the end of the month, is we just slow our breathing down and bump up our carbon dioxide just a hair. And we'll teach you simple tricks for that. And I'll teach you some more complicated ones if you want to have a good time with that. So fasting is something you can do. It gets a little harder if you're doing AM, PM antibiotics. But usually what I do is people are eating all the time. I say, hey, how much are you not eating? Let's say they're like, well, I don't eat for about 12 hours. All right, well, tomorrow, why don't we try 13, and in a week, why don't we go to 14? Just ratchet it up slowly. And for a lot of people, it's like, don't eat for an hour or two before bed, and then just maybe don't eat breakfast or whatever. I tend to love dinner. I love breakfast too, but I love dinner right before I go to bed. I know a lot of people say that that's not good for your body. If you don't have reflux, when you eat a lot, think Thanksgiving, what happens next? You get parasympathetic, you get tired, you take a nap. So it's like, hey, if I want to optimize the function of my gut, optimize my digestion of the food in my gut, why wouldn't I do it when my body's most parasympathetic? So, and if I want to sleep and I need to sleep because I'm stressed out or I have a chronic infection or whatever, if the food can help me fall asleep, then let's use that. A lot of people wake up at like 2 a.m. They're just like, whoa, why am I awake? And I have my insomnia. It's because they have hypoglycemia in the middle of the night. So they might need a protein fat snack before bed. So I just put them all together. that works for me personally. Doesn't work for everybody. And I think that's beautiful. It's just a way to apply physiology and you see if it works for you. Um, so, yeah, someone mentioned doctors say sometimes Lyme breaks up marriages. I've certainly seen Lyme cause a lot of stress, both in patient marriages as well as in physician marriages, because it's a complicated thing. And as you know, I mean, I'm still here talking about this because my heart goes out to everyone, and I want us all to be part of that movement where we can really make a huge difference in everybody's lives. There's a question about could IGeneX and I would add Galaxy T Labs and a few other labs out there be covered by insurance. There's a really complicated answer to that, and it depends on who. It's always like who's on what panel, right? It's the problem with insurance across the board. I do know IGeneX is working with a smaller insurer in California to try it out. I've also heard through the grapevine that some of the labs are working with some of the major labs to have the major lab purchase their kit and run their kits on their own. And I don't, and so if say BioReference, LabCorp, or Quest bought IGeneX kits or Galaxy kits and they ran them, it would be much more likely, if not like a slam dunk, that insurers would cover it. And so that is something that people are really working on. I will also say there's a group, Diasorin from Italy, that's working on a antibody combined with a T-cell test. And they've gone right now from 56% sensitivity to over 75% sensitivity in detecting active Lyme infections. And their feeling is that is actually not enough. And it is big when you're talking to like a CEO of a company who wants to roll out their lab to the general public so that they can start making money rather than hemorrhaging in the research phases. That was music to my ears. So they're actually working about combining a lot of the stuff that we're doing to try to make a better test, and they're getting closer. So, and that is actually, they're working with the FDA, and that would be expected to be fully insurance-based. That would be the goal. Let's see what else we got here, and we'll take a couple more, and then we can call it quits because we got another 4 this whole month. And certainly, when we post the replay, if anybody wants to go back, has any questions, drop that in the chat. We'll make sure we get them answered. And if it's a bigger topic, I'll know what YouTube videos you guys want to know more about. I want to make all the educational videos that will help you guys and also help others. Somebody's saying, yeah, you can spend thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars, and always be seronegative. Challenges, I would challenge them to maybe do something a little different, like, to do a provocative test, maybe say that it is possible that seronegative. I mean, the problem in the Lyme field is we say that everything's Lyme, and as soon as we decide that, we just keep going. I'm going to keep testing until somebody proves my point. I'm like, well, what if it's something else? Right. And so there's this thing called the null hypothesis. And this is what the other side forgot to do a long time ago. And that is, I don't try to build the study to prove my point, because it's really easy to become very biased and skewed if I'm just proving my own opinion. So I walk into the office every single day, and if my patient on their chart says Lyme, Babesia, Bartonella, I do my damnedest in that appointment to prove they do not have it. And if I am unable to prove they do not have it, because I already believe they do, I want to disprove my opinion, then I accept the null hypothesis that they do. And that way it keeps me honest, because I want to make sure that I'm doing the best for the person. I say this all the time. I do not care what you have. I could care less. I'm not wed to mold, mast cell, porphyria, cancer, Lyme, blood pressure, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. But what I do need to care about is what you actually have. I need to know the names so I can help you get better. But if you come to me and you say you have Lyme, and I go, hey, you know what? I had this actually happen to me. I had someone come up from Florida, said, I know I have Lyme. My family has Lyme. They think I have Lyme. I have Lyme. I go, what do you have? He's like, joint pain, brain fog, and fatigue. I go, well, that's what I had with Lyme. That makes sense. What else is going on? And we just talked about it. I did a comprehensive workup. His thyroid stimulating hormone was nearly 100 when it should be below 0.4 to 4.5. So he was profoundly hypothyroid, which causes brain fog, joint pain, and fatigue. And within 2 months on thyroid, he had 0 symptoms. Is it a problem that he didn't have chronic Lyme and I told him he didn't have chronic Lyme? No, it's like, hallelujah. Like, in fact, most people, if I told them they didn't have cancer, they'd be like, yes. And if I tell you you don't have chronic Lyme, you give me the bird, right? Don't get wed to the label. Let's find out what it is. that being said, seronegative Lyme, just like seronegative rheumatoid arthritis, is a real thing. And if you have a lot of immune dysfunction, one of the things I see a lot of doctors miss too on that point is checking immunoglobulins. So if you don't have a functioning immune system that makes IgM, IgG, and IgA, how can you use IgM, IgG, and IgA for your test? You know, and so you really need to be looking at that. And I did not read the rest of the statement before I started talking. So they go, when everything else has been ruled out, I would definitely agree. Like, don't just keep testing. And I'll go back to one of the things Dr. Charles Ray Jones shared with me over and over and over. And anybody who trains with me in these kind of things, or the practitioners who are in our Lyme disease practitioner certification program, where we do mentorship and get them up to speed. So we have more doctors who can help you and can think on their own and know what to do with the literature. Is Lyme is a clinical diagnosis supported by lab data. And the thing about that you need to know is Harrison's textbook of internal medicine says the same thing, right? So, you know, you don't necessarily need to get a positive test. It'd be nice, but the bottom line is it's almost like for the doctor, pee or get off the pot, right? It's like, is it Lyme or is it not? And you start your working diagnosis, it's Lyme. Okay, and you keep working and you use that diagnosis until you find out something that's more likely it. So when a doctor calls me up, they don't have Lyme disease. I'm like, you know, that is music to my ears. I am so happy to hear that. What do they have? Because if you can tell me what they have that's not Lyme disease, maybe we have a chance of getting them better quickly or more quickly. And they're all like, oh, well, I guess they might have Lyme disease. I'm like, okay. So as long as we're looking at the differential of all the possibilities and we're narrowing it down, and Lyme's still remains the primary, you don't need a positive blood test to call it that, you know? And we'll talk a lot about stress and other things later on, just doing a quick scroll because we are way over, but I appreciate everybody sticking around because it's a lot of fun to be able to answer these things, you know? And yeah, mold can be a huge problem, you know? Oh, one thing, somebody asked, can dogs get into a tick box? They could attack it and open it, but typically no. It's just like a really small hole for the chipmunk or something smaller to get in so the rodent can get it rubbed onto. Yeah, only mice and small rodents. Thanks, Shelley, for answering that back then. Yeah, and then, you know, IGeneX does give you the genus of what's infecting you. It gives you a lot of species too, right? It gives you Lyme. It gives you 3 or 4 tick-borne relapsing fevers. I think it's Hermsii, Terracate, Miyamotoi. And then we've got 2 Babesias, Microtium duncani, and we've got 4 Bartonellas. So we've got Bartonella Hensley, Quintana Vinsoni, and Elizabethae. And then we also have the genus level so that we're not missing the other ones, right? So it can be really helpful. Oh, one other thing that I'll talk about this later in the thing, but I just want to, since we brought it up, there are people, or I should say, there is a panel. It's the IGeneX 4IB panel. They will give you the entire Lyme panel with all the expanded crap and the tick-borne relapsing fever panel, along with the speciation. So we're talking $450 for the Lyme plus the two screening tests. They're fancy ones that are $195, and they'll give you the $650 tick-borne relapsing fever and the $450 Babesia and $450 Bartonella panels for $12.99. So if your doctor or other provider can order the 4IB panel, it's the retail price on that is $29.40, I believe, and you can get it discounted at $12.99. They just have to know to ask for that. So that could be really helpful. Let's see. Yeah, so I want to say thank you to everybody. I know there's a bit on mast cell. We can circle back when we start talking about more of the advanced topics. Food histamine intolerance, we can hit a couple of these last 3 questions, or 4, excuse me, quickly, and then we'll head out and hit the rest next time. You know, foods can trigger histamine release. The big thing with mast cell activation is and I love Beth O'Hara and Jill Christar, 2 the people talk so eloquently about this, but Beth O'Hara says, hey, the mast cells are types of white cells that are sentinels. They're always on guard. So the more they're always on guard, the more they're hypervigilant. It's just like if you're stressed out and you're getting anxious and there's a lot on your plate and you're really getting overwhelmed, you know, you're like, oh, like to every little sound. And that's what your mast cells start doing. They start letting out histamine. But if you listen to like Dr. Theorides, he talks a lot. It's not just histamine, it's other stuff that we can't measure. And histamine's a pain in the ass to measure too. But when people have food or other histamine intolerance, like histamine intolerance to candida or to mold, you can start to have this hyperhistamine degranulation from the mast cells, and you're having all of these allergy symptoms. And the thing is, like when people are starting to have like reacting to 75 foods, right? That's not possible. It's like you can't react negatively to air. But when you start to essentially react negatively to air, it's saying that your immune system is dysfunctional, and the mast cells are part of that, and they can get going. So if you're having things like a racing heart rate, a high heart rate, that could be anything from, in Lyme, we know that it can mess up the vagus control of calming the heart down. But we also know stress can do that. We know that musculoskeletal things here. So we see a lot of people, head forward posture because we're using our phones and our iPads. That can lead to heart racing. But so can all the other things we've talked about. So I'm definitely taking the time to look if food might be one of the drivers that can do that. For the question on SOT therapy, I think it's very overpriced for what you would get in Lyme and Bartonella. And there's not a really lot of good evidence that it should work there. I know a lot of Lyme practitioners who use it. It's a great way to make money. If it helps you, great. I would say go over to Marty Ross's website, because Marty does an amazing write-up on SOT therapy. I'll see actually if I can find it real quick for you. It should just be Marty Ross SOT. It should probably come up. And so I will drop this in the chat. Marty's a good friend. He has a ton of expertise treating Lyme. His website is treatlyme.net. So if you're not exposed to Marty, definitely go check out some of his work. But the thing is, with all that said, I've told so many people this, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I do have one person who got it towards the end of their Bartonella treatment. She was told it would get her better 6 months sooner. I'm like, how the hell can you tell her it's going to get you better 6 months sooner? Because we don't know how long it's going to take it to heal. But I will say, it did seem like there was a turning point for her. So I think what I always try to say is, I want to give you the information that's going to help the most people get the most better. And then we're going to go down from there. And SOT for me is at the lower end of the pyramid, just even like Rife. So can testing be done in Canada? There's a whole bunch of tests that can be, some that can't be. I believe IGeneX can be done. And actually, I think in Canada, and I'm not 100% sure, you can call IGeneX and they'll tell you that a lot of people were having to go, at least from British Columbia, down into Seattle to get their IGeneX drawn. But I don't know if that's changed. But just give them an email or a call and they can help you out with that one. Yeah, it's really interesting. Why don't we close at this? Food sensitivities. Can Lyme cause it? Yes. Can co-infections cause it? Yes. Can mold cause it? Yes. So Lyme and Babesia and Bartonella have been biopsied out of the gut wall, so they can directly and indirectly mess up the gut wall. The treatment of all of those three pathogens can mess up the gut, whether it's meds or herbs. Herbs aren't just like, we can just throw them at you and you'll never have a side effect. Mold can directly change the composition of the gut, as we spoke about earlier, and that can lead to issues with food sensitivities. Stress can lead to that, and a whole slew of other things, and a lot of our medicines that disrupt that gut microbiome. But the other thing is, there's a concept called metabolic endotoxemia. That's where you're getting normal stuff from your gut into your body at a higher rate. Anything that causes inflammation of the gut wall can lead to metabolic endotoxemia, which puts you at risk for food sensitivities, for heart disease, for early dementia and all those things. So again, let's work on our gut. Think about the diet of what we're putting in our mouth, the diet that we're putting into our eyes and our brains, and the diet we're putting into our heart. And then thank you so very much for taking the time and for everybody to stick around all this extra. I really appreciate it. I see so many people still here. Yeah, I love Marty Ross as well. Lots of blessings to you too, Roberta. It's interesting too. Roberta made a comment about, I no longer wake up at night to pee, and the cortisol levels are lower and more balanced, mast cells eased. It can definitely, you're going to get little nuanced symptoms or improvements over time. This is where I follow a tracker that's loosely based on the work kind of a combination of what Joe Borscano and Ray Jones were doing, and really a lot based on what Richard Horowitz did with his evidence-based medically validated questionnaire. The medically validated questionnaire is a little bit more for, really that initial diagnosis. And then if you take out the diagnosis questions, you can use all the other ones to follow. So I do frequency and severity, and I have people check them all the time. Follow your symptoms. Don't obsess about them. Write them down and put them away. It's almost like a daily sheets or whatever that thing is called, where people get up in the morning and they just journal like 3, 4, 5 pages, get everything out of their mind, just throw it away. I would suggest write down your symptoms maybe at the end of the day, and then file it somewhere and only look at them when your doctor needs to know about them so that you can find a pattern. Don't ruminate and obsess over them, but those little symptoms as they change are the ones that are really going to make the biggest difference. So thank you for the comment of legend. I'll take that as a mic drop. And yeah, we are all going to make it. And I really appreciate everybody hanging out. Again, the replay of this will be up in about a day and a half. In fact, the one I did last night for practitioners got out tonight. I won't promise 24 hours because I don't want to make my video team work overtime, but they'll get it done and up as soon as possible within 48 hours. The replay there. And then certainly feel free to share this with all your friends. I'll make sure in the replay notes on YouTube that I'll have a link for registration. And then again, we're going to be back every Wednesday in May. I've got a lot of special announcements on week 4 and 5, so can't wait to have you then. Until next time, everybody, lots of love and heal up well. Thanks for the super energy tonight and the vibes, because it comes through loud and clear in the chat. So blessings right back at every one of you. Love you all. See you soon. So that's a wrap on today's eye-opening session. You're the heroes on the front line of your health, armed with knowledge and ready to win this battle against Lyme disease. And if this class gave you even one golden nugget of insight, consider subscribing to our channel. This is your go-to library for Lyme disease mastery and recovery. Your support means the world to me, and it fuels this movement. We need voices like yours to spread the word. So leave a big thumbs up, and in the comments, I'd love to know what your biggest takeaway from this class has been. What is that action step that you're going to take because you attended tonight? And then make sure that you share this video far and wide so that others can benefit just the same way you have. Because every view, every comment, and every like takes us one step closer to a Lyme disease-free world. So join us next week for another empowering session. So until then, keep up the momentum, keep learning, and keep taking action, because together we are unstoppable. So I'll be seeing you in the comments, and can't wait to see you at our next class. So stay awesome and all the best on your healing journey.